So first off, I wanted to ask you, why do you think structuring this film like this with, the multiple points of view and having them stagger throughout the movie, why do you think this is the best way to tell a thriller like this?
The non-linear narrative was one of the defining features of the script that I thought was an intriguing new approach to telling a sort of neo-noir thriller. I enjoyed the single point perspective of each of the sort of chapters in the film. I thought it allowed you to really experience and feel the story from that character's point of view. I think it helped with as a sort of filmmaker, taking the audience down a very, very kind of single, narrow point of view from that sort of character. And then it allowed you at the end to take away some of that perspective and to take the stabilizers away, so to speak, and then leave the audience not sure what they are able to hang on to and sort of who to believe and who not to believe.
Yeah, because I think as the chapters go on, it's like you have a certain perception of certain characters, and then as you see another chapter, like, oh wait, that's not this character at all. So that was fun about this movie. And it's also a very New York movie, and not really in the terms of like, the setting, but kind of like the power structure that it kind of presents as far as in class structures and things like that. So why do you think that this is a perfect movie to have set in the hustle and bustle of New York as well?
So, I mean, I think this movie is a New York film to the bones. When I think about a city that sort of operates at the sharp end of the American dream, a city that sort of that in a few short decades has has become the sort of heart of market capitalism, has sort of deregulation, takeovers, has insane wealth. And the disparity between the sort of rich and the poor is everywhere. And for me, a city that sort of venerates and attracts hustlers and chancers and grifters, it felt to me that Sharper was the perfect place to set this movie.
Yeah. And especially because, like, if you're in New York, you've been in New York or live in New York, you can see you can visualize a lot of that stuff just like on a daily basis. But it's like what happens behind closed doors is kind of the stuff that we see in Sharper that kind of like, sets it apart, so to speak.
I've always been interested in the kind of the private and the public, and and other programs I've made before. That certainly makes a point of the sort of what goes on behind the closed doors, what's front facing and what's behind. And I think that was what we lent into in terms of The Crown, and certainly in Sharper, there's a little bit of sort of seeing the mechanics of what happens behind closed doors.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, and I can't wait for people to see this film.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Julianne, I'll start with you first, as I know you are a producer on the project as well. And I think the most interesting thing about this movie is that, the way it's presented in these multiple point of views, and it kind of has like this chapter structure. Why do you think a story like this was, worthy to be told in this format where you kind of, peel back the layers as you go on and don't really know a character's true intentions until like, really the end?
Well, I like the way the writers sort of segmented the movie, because it's also like, so each character's kind of given not just a chapter, but it's also sort of a point of view. Like how are you seeing this story through whose eyes? And I just think that's important in terms of narrative and in terms of experience, because every experience changes depending on whose point of view it is. So it sort of allows you to not have, as you were saying earlier, an ambassador through the movie. You don't have somebody who's bringing you through it. And so it kind of keeps you on your toes, because you're like, well, what is this? What story is being told? Whose point of view is it? I think it makes it that much more exciting.
Yes, yes. And Sebastian, for you, Max is one of the characters, well, actually all the characters have kind of like these questionable morals and ethics. So when you're thinking about diving into this role as an actor, from an actor's perspective, were you thinking from the lens of, okay, this is a person with questionable morals and they're just like, this is how they operate? Or do you look at the bigger picture of what he was kind of going for and like what he actually wanted, or just like the bad versus the good, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at it all, you know. I think you have an experience when you first read the script, like an audience member, you know, you're just taking in information and, you know, you might get certain things about it, about the story and the characters and your character that may be useful later. But then I think as you keep going and working on it, I feel like it becomes more subjective than objective. But I always like, I always think like you have to kind of keep, you know, the bird's eye view of where what is the thing asking of you of this character, and how do you fit into the story, and honoring that without judgment, and like trying to kind of, and in this situation, you know, the guy was he's a real mystery in a way, and part of that came from, you know, myself and out of our rehearsals and working with Ben, creating this backstory of what may have happened, the pieces we don't see in the film, to ground what you do see in the film, you know?
Yeah, and it's so interesting because like when we first meet the characters, like I felt like I had a perception of who he was, and then the next point of view kicks in. I'm like, okay, wait, I was completely wrong. I was completely wrong. This is totally different. And also, this is a very New York film, especially not in terms of just like visually, but kind of the terms of, you know, put it this way, and you know what goes on behind. You kind of visualize kind of like, you know, class differences in New York, but kind of understand what it looks like behind closed doors as well. But one fun thing was the fashions that Madeline had throughout this entire film. Like it was just like Fifth Avenue every scene. So I just want to know what was so fun about diving into that aspect of this bougie character who just like, you know, was really feeling herself through most of this movie till the very end, you know?
I loved it. I loved it. And you hit the nail on the head. She is for herself, man. She's someone who does what she does because it makes her feel good. There's some pleasure that she's exacting every single time that she does something, because you know, she's a complicated character. She's a complicated person. So you really look at it and you think like, huh, what's going on with her? But when you look at it from the point of view of her doing what she wants and getting pleasure from it, suddenly it kind of makes sense, including like everything that she wears. Like, you know, things that people wear and things that people say and the way they move, all of those things are signifiers. They're telling the world who you are or who you want to be, or who, you know, and she's someone who's very, very skilled at that kind of communication.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you both so much, and I can't wait for everyone to see the film.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, man.
much.
Briana, I'll start with you first. Because your character is one of the first ones we were kind of introduced to, but we really don't know a lot about her motives until, you know, we're quite way through the film, as with most other characters. But what was the fun in having to peel back the layers as the movie goes on? And was that part of what attracted you to this role?
Totally. I love it, peeling back the layers as we go on. I mean, the way that I viewed it, it was less of peeling back the layers and more of just different shades of a person. I think that helped. I think that helped me stay away from any kind of inauthenticity. Well, just wanting to keep the integrity of who she is as a person throughout all these different iterations of her. But I love the idea of peeling back the layers too.
Yes, yes. You know, it's interesting because I think this is the perfect film to tell a story like this, because I think it was Julianne Sebastian once said there's not like this objective narrator or narrator character that kind of like guides you through it. Like you're having to, like, the viewer has to lead themselves through the film. So that's why when you're like, okay, during one part of the film, like, okay, I think I know what this character is. And then once you realize their point of view, you're like, oh, that's that's not how the character is at all. And just as for you, you know, there's sort of this earnestness that we kind of always get from Tom that we don't necessarily see from some of the more but morally questionable characters that we see in the film, that kind of sets him apart. So what was it like, you know, being able to have a character in here that was kind of different from the rest of this ensemble?
I mean, it was not as fun because I definitely wanted to do some of the stuff that they were doing, but you know, it is always my pursuit to find the truth of the character that I'm playing in any role. And so I just made sure to like really tap into Tom's vulnerability, his instability. And I was really focused on this thing that happens with rich kids, at least a lot of rich kids that I grew up with, where they have such an aversion to being referred to as
Yeah.
rich, or like being like to their own privilege that they were born into. And I thought that that was such an interesting psychology, and I was like, oh, this is something that I can really explore and play with. And there's a whole reasoning behind that I created, but I won't bore you with all the details.
No, it's interesting though, because I was watching the film. It's like I could immediately pinpoint in my mind people that I think are like that I could place that I've met over the course of my life that are like Tom. Just people that, you know, have this access, but then like with the access, they're like, okay, I want a bookstore.
Yes,
Things
exactly.
like that. So it was definitely relatable from that aspect. And then lastly, for both of you, you know, this is a very New York film. Not only in terms visually, but kind of like in terms of, you know, like class differences. And it's kind of in ways like, you know, if you live in New York or you're from New York or been in New York, you kind of see that every day, like, you know, as you're traversing through the city. But this film kind of shows like what happens behind closed doors that kind of exposes that as well. So why do you think New York was the perfect setting for a movie like this?
New York is one big bookstore, in that it's just an amalgam of a bunch of different stories where everyone believes that they're the protagonist, specifically in New York. You know,
Mhm.
there is an energy to New York. There is like a move out of the way, I am the main character energy to New York. And I think that this film kind of captures that sentiment, you know, because it's a perspective-based film, because there's no clear protagonist and antagonist. Yeah, so it was the perfect environment. It was the perfect backdrop for this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I also think it was perfect because what our characters are doing, it's a lot of it is moving through different worlds, very different communities in New York. There's very few places like New York that has you know a access to all of these different places, whether it's socioeconomic status or geographically.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you both so much for chatting with me. And I can't wait for everyone to see the film.
Thank you so much.